Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly mundane and decidedly unglamorous reality of bat life. Those mysterious creatures we've mythologized in movies and folklore actually spend most of their existence doing incredibly ordinary things, like hanging upside down for 20 hours a day and arguing over the best cave spots. While we imagine them as dramatic nocturnal hunters, the truth is being a bat is mostly just really, really boring. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up one morning and suddenly your nest feels like a studio apartment that 3 people are sharing with someone who snores. Your siblings have developed elbows that seem specifically engineered to find your ribs. And frankly, everyone smells like they've been living in a tree hollow for weeks. Which, to be fair, you have. Your mother peers down at you with the expression of someone who just realized she's been running a very small, very chaotic daycare center without a business license. She makes a sound that roughly translates to, well, I guess it's time. Though in your limited experience, her timing on most things has been questionable at best. The entrance to your nest, which has served as your entire universe up until this point, suddenly looks less like a doorway and more like the mouth of a cannon pointed directly at certain doom. But your mother is doing that thing where she pretends everything is fine, while clearly having second thoughts about her life choices, so you figure this must be normal. You approach the edge with all the confidence of someone who has never actually used their legs for anything more ambitious than shifting position during naps. The outside world rushes up to meet you, like an overeager relative at a family reunion. Too bright, too loud, and moving way faster than seems strictly necessary. Your first step onto an actual tree branch is a revelation in physics that no one bothered to prepare you for. Branches, it turns out, are not the sturdy platforms you imagined from your cozy nest observations. They sway, they bounce. They seem to have opinions about your weight distribution that they express through alarming creaking sounds. You take what you intend to be a confident stride forward and immediately discover that confidence and coordination are 2 entirely different skill sets. Your left paw goes one way, your right paw heads off on what appears to be a solo adventure, and your center of gravity, which you're just now learning you have, decides this is an excellent time to relocate somewhere near your left ear. The branch beneath you performs what can only be described as interpretive dance, and you find yourself gripping bark with claws you didn't know were retractable, looking like someone trying to hug a telephone pole while riding a mechanical bull. Your mother watches this performance with the patient expression of someone who has seen this particular show several times before. She makes an encouraging chittering sound that roughly translates to, "You're doing great, sweetie," though her tone suggests she's already mentally composing her will. The tree, you realize with growing horror, is enormous. What looked like a manageable climb from the safety of your nest now reveals itself as a vertical metropolis with more neighborhoods than you can count. Branches extend in directions that seem to violate basic principles of organization, creating a 3-dimensional maze that would challenge an urban planner having a very bad day. Every surface appears to be covered in either bark that wants to shed itself all over you, or leaves that rustle with what sounds suspiciously like laughter when you brush against them. The whole structure sways with a rhythm that suggests it's either breathing or mocking you, possibly both. You attempt what you hope will be perceived as a purposeful step to the next branch, and instead perform what can only be described as controlled panic with style. Your back legs scramble for purchase while your front paws windmill through the air like you're trying to flag down a very small taxi. Gravity, meanwhile, introduces itself with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever who just learned its favorite human is home. It pulls at you with consistent, cheerful determination, apparently under the impression that you and the ground below are old friends who really should spend more time together. The branch you're attempting to reach might as well be on another continent. What looked like a simple hop from your nest now appears to require the athletic abilities of a circus performer and the timing of a Swiss watch. You hang suspended in what feels like the world's most precarious trust exercise, with only your rapidly cramping claws between you and a very intimate meeting with several lower branches. Your first successful branch-to-branch transition happens purely by accident. You lose your grip, flail wildly, and somehow land sprawled across your target branch like someone who just fell off a particularly low-flying aircraft. It's not graceful, it's certainly not intentional, and you're fairly sure you pulled something important in your shoulder, but you're alive and technically in a new location. You pause to catch your breath and assess the situation. From this new vantage point, the tree looks even more impossibly large, extending both up and down into distances that make you slightly dizzy. The ground, visible through gaps in the foliage, appears to be located somewhere around next Tuesday. Your mother, observing from her comfortable perch, makes a sound that could be interpreted as either encouragement or the squirrel equivalent of, well, that's one way to do it. She's clearly restraining herself from offering a detailed critique of your technique, though her tail is twitching in a way that suggests she has opinions. Over the following days, you begin to develop what could generously be called a personal style of tree navigation. It involves significantly more contact with bark than seems optimal, and your approach to changing direction could best be described as aggressive negotiation with momentum, but you're moving through three-dimensional space without dying, which feels like progress. The art of the leap, you discover, is less about graceful arcing through the air and more about calculating acceptable crash-landing scenarios. You develop a technique that involves launching yourself in the general direction of your target and then making frantic adjustments during flight, like trying to parallel park while falling. Your tail, which has been following you around like a confused but loyal pet, gradually reveals itself to be either the most helpful thing you own or a saboteur working for gravity. In theory, it's supposed to provide balance and steering during aerial maneuvers. In practice, it often seems to be trying to wrap itself around branches at precisely the wrong moment, or generating lift in directions you didn't authorize. During one particularly ambitious attempt to cross between trees, your tail catches a gust of wind and essentially turns you into a very small, very confused furry kite. You find yourself gliding sideways through space, spinning slowly like a rotisserie chicken, with your tail spread out behind you like a banner advertising your complete lack of control over the situation. The landing is what could politely be called dynamic. You ricochet off several branches, perform an unintentional somersault, and come to rest hanging upside down from a twig that's bending in ways that suggest it's having serious doubts about its life choices. Your tail, meanwhile, has wrapped itself around your head like a furry blindfold, as if it's decided that if it can't see what's happening, then technically it's not participating. You spend several minutes in this position, rotating slowly like a very small, very dizzy disco ball, while you contemplate the series of decisions that led to this moment. The view from upside down is actually quite interesting. The tree looks like an elaborate chandelier, and the ground appears to be floating above you like a particularly textured ceiling. Eventually, you manage to right yourself through a combination of physics, determination, and what can only be described as interpretive dance performed while hanging from your ankles. The process involves significantly more undignified wriggling than you'd prefer to admit, but you emerge right side up and only slightly more traumatized than when you started. Your social interactions with other young squirrels reveal that either you're a particularly slow learner, or everyone else had access to some kind of advanced training program that nobody bothered to tell you about. Other squirrels your age move through the trees with casual confidence, like they're walking down a sidewalk instead of navigating a three-dimensional obstacle course suspended 40 feet above certain doom. You watch them perform effortless leaps between branches that still require you to spend several minutes psyching yourself up, calculating angles, and mentally preparing your will. They seem to understand intuitively which branches will support them, and which ones are just decorative suggestions, while you continue to trust optimistically in twigs that collapse under your weight, with what sounds suspiciously like relief. During your first attempt at social interaction, you approach a group of other young squirrels with what you hope is casual confidence, but probably looks more like someone walking into a party where they don't know anyone and aren't sure they were actually invited. The other squirrels pause their conversation, which appears to involve detailed technical discussions about optimal nut caching locations and advanced bark stripping techniques. To observe your approach, you attempt a nonchalant leap to their branch and instead perform what can only be described as a controlled collision with a tree trunk, followed by a sideways slide that ends with you hanging by your claws and trying to pretend this was intentional. One of the other squirrels makes a sound that's either sympathetic or barely contained laughter. Another offers what seems like helpful advice about claw placement, though it's delivered in the tone of someone explaining very basic concepts to someone who probably shouldn't be trusted with sharp objects. You eventually manage to join their group, though your arrival has clearly shifted the conversation from advanced techniques to basic safety protocols. They're kind about it, in the way that people are kind when they're watching someone struggle with a task that they mastered so long ago they can barely remember finding it difficult. The revelation that the world extends below trees hits you with all the subtlety of a natural disaster. From your aerial perspective, the ground has been more of a theoretical concept than an actual destination. Like the ocean floor or the dark side of the moon. The idea that you might actually go down there, on purpose, seems roughly equivalent to deciding to take a vacation in outer space. Your first intentional descent happens more by accident than design. You're attempting what you believe to be a relatively straightforward branch transition when physics decides to give you an impromptu lesson in trajectory calculation. Your planned graceful arc transforms into what can best be described as a very short-lived career in aviation, ending with your unscheduled landing in what turns out to be surprisingly accommodating grass. The ground, you discover, is both exactly what you expected and completely different from anything you imagined. It's solid, which is a pleasant change from the constant swaying and flexing of branches, but it also extends in all directions like the world's largest, flattest tree trunk. There are no convenient handholds, no obvious navigation routes, and worst of all, no quick escape routes back to the safety of vertical territory. Grass, which looked like a simple green carpet from above, reveals itself to be an entire ecosystem at ground level. Each blade is like a tiny tree, creating a miniature forest that rustles and whispers with mysterious activity. Things move down here. Small things, quick things, things that make the grass shimmer and dance in ways that suggest they're either very shy or very good at avoiding creatures like you. You take a tentative step and immediately sink slightly into soil that gives way under your weight. This is disconcerting in the way that finding quicksand would be disconcerting, except that you're fairly sure this is just how ground is supposed to work. The sensation of walking on something that compresses and springs back is entirely foreign after a lifetime of rigid branches and solid bark. The smells down here are overwhelming in their complexity. Everything has a scent. The earth, the grass, the mysterious rustling things, even the air itself carries information you don't quite know how to process. It's like someone turned up the volume on a radio that's been playing quietly in the background your entire life. Your nose twitches frantically, trying to categorize and understand this symphony of odors that ranges from pleasantly earthy to vaguely alarming. A butterfly lands nearby, and you experience your first ground-level encounter with a creature that's not a squirrel. It's roughly your size but completely wrong in every possible way. Too colorful, too delicate, and moving in patterns that seem to completely ignore both gravity and common sense. It hovers and dances through the air like it's swimming through invisible water, occasionally touching down on flowers with the casual confidence of someone who has never worried about falling. You watch this performance with the fascination of someone observing alien technology. The butterfly's complete lack of concern for basic safety protocols is both inspiring and deeply troubling. It lands, takes off, changes direction mid-flight, and generally behaves like someone who has never heard of predators or the concept of being eaten by larger creatures. Your contemplation of butterfly aerodynamics is interrupted by your first human sighting. The experience is roughly equivalent to discovering that mountains can walk. The human appears at the edge of your vision like a moving geological feature. It's impossibly tall, wider than several trees, and making sounds that seem too loud for any creature that expects to survive in the wild. Every instinct you've developed screams that this is clearly a predator of unprecedented size and capability, while simultaneously being confused by its completely impractical behavior. The human moves with all the stealth of a small earthquake, making no apparent attempt to hide its presence or avoid stepping on things that crunch loudly under its massive feet. Its coloring is all wrong for camouflage, bright colors that would make it visible from considerable distance to anything with functional eyesight. It's either the world's most confident apex predator or the most oblivious creature in the ecosystem. Then the human sees you, and its behavior becomes even more baffling. Instead of the immediate chase and consume response you'd expect from something that size, it stops moving entirely and makes soft, high-pitched sounds that seem designed to be non-threatening. It points at you with one of its enormous appendages, while making cooing noises that sound like it might be trying to communicate approval or delight. You freeze in place, which is your default response to most unexpected situations, but seems particularly appropriate when facing a creature that could accidentally step on you while trying to be gentle. The human continues its strange display of non-predatory behavior, making encouraging sounds and moving very slowly, as if it's trying not to startle you. This is deeply confusing. Everything about this creature suggests it should be either ignoring you entirely or trying to eat you, but instead, it seems genuinely pleased to see you. It reaches into some kind of container it's carrying and produces what appears to be food. small brown objects that it tosses gently in your direction. The food lands near you with soft thudding sounds, and you cautiously investigate. They're nuts. Good nuts. Actually, better quality than most of what you've been finding on your own. The human continues its soft, encouraging sounds while backing away slightly, apparently trying to give you space to approach the offering. This is your first lesson in the completely backwards logic of human behavior. They're clearly capable of being dangerous. Anything that size moving that confidently through the world has to be near the top of the food chain. But they seem to get some kind of pleasure from feeding smaller creatures. It's like discovering that sharks enjoy giving swimming lessons. You cautiously approach one of the nuts, keeping your attention divided between the food and the human. The nut is definitely real, definitely good quality, and definitely free. The human makes more happy sounds when you pick it up, as if your acceptance of the gift has somehow made its day better. This interaction fundamentally changes your understanding of how the world works. Not everything large is automatically dangerous. Not everything that could hurt you wants to hurt you. And sometimes food just appears for reasons that have nothing to do with your own efforts to find it. Autumn arrives with all the subtlety of someone rearranging all the furniture in your house while you're sleeping. One day, the world is green and comfortable and predictable. And the next day, every tree looks like it's been set on fire and is dying very dramatically and colourfully. The leaves, which have been reliable and green and generally well-behaved all summer, suddenly develop personalities and decide to turn red, orange, yellow, and combinations of colours that seem designed purely for showing off. It's like nature decided to redecorate without consulting anyone, and chose a colour scheme that can be seen from space. At first, this seems like a pleasant enough change. The new colours are actually quite beautiful, and the world looks like someone has been experimenting with very expensive paint. But then the leaves begin their great abandonment, detaching themselves from branches with what can only be described as theatrical flair and drifting down like colourful confetti at the world's most elaborate going-away party. This creates several immediate problems. First, the trees suddenly have significantly fewer places to hide. Branches that were comfortably concealed behind leafy curtains are now exposed like someone opened all the blinds in a house full of people who weren't expecting company. Your favourite hideouts and secret routes are suddenly visible to everyone, including creatures you'd prefer didn't know about your daily routine. Second, the falling leaves create a constant rustling background noise that makes it nearly impossible to detect the approach of anything else. Every step you take produces a symphony of crunching sounds that announces your location to every predator within a considerable radius. Moving stealthily through the leaf litter is like trying to sneak around while wearing tap shoes. The ground, meanwhile, disappears under a thick carpet of fallen leaves that turns every surface into a guessing game. What looks like solid earth might be concealing a hole, a root, or a rock that's exactly the wrong height for comfortable walking. Every step becomes an adventure in ankle management and faith-based navigation. Your mother's behavior during this transition is perhaps the most alarming change. The relaxed, occasionally distracted squirrel you've known all summer transforms into what can only be described as a furry tornado with an agenda. She begins each day with the focused intensity of someone who just remembered they have an important deadline that's approaching faster than they'd like to admit. She develops an obsession with nuts that goes far beyond normal interest in food. Every acorn, every walnut, every remotely edible seed becomes a matter of critical importance that must be evaluated, transported, and buried according to some complex system that she clearly understands, but has never bothered to explain to you. You watch her perform quality control inspections on nuts with the thoroughness of a jewelry appraiser examining diamonds. She holds each one up to the light, rotates it to examine every angle, and occasionally taps it against tree bark, as if listening for some secret message hidden inside. Nuts that pass this inspection are treated like precious cargo, while those that fail are discarded with the disdain usually reserved for expired food. The burial process itself becomes an elaborate ritual that involves more digging than seems strictly necessary, precise positioning of the nut within the hole, and careful camouflage of the burial site that includes rearranging nearby leaves and sometimes adding decorative touches that seem designed to disguise the location from anyone who might be watching. She moves through this routine with mechanical efficiency, but also with an underlying urgency that suggests she's racing against some kind of invisible countdown. Her usual chattiness disappears, replaced by the focused silence of someone concentrating on a task that's too important to be interrupted by conversation. You attempt to help with this mysterious project, but your efforts are generally received with the patience usually shown to someone who's trying to help by reorganizing your filing system. She allows you to assist with the digging, but clearly doesn't trust your judgment regarding nut quality or burial locations. Your suggestions for cache sites are politely ignored, and your attempts at nut evaluation are met with gentle but firm corrections. The entire forest seems to be caught up in this same frenzied preparation. Other squirrels move with similar urgency, creating a network of barely visible paths through the leaf litter as they transport their hoarded treasures to secret locations. The trees become highways of determined squirrels carrying nuts like tiny construction workers rushing to complete a project before the weather changes. Birds join the general exodus preparation, though their approach is less subtle than yours. They gather in increasingly large groups, holding what appear to be organizational meetings that involve a lot of loud discussion and disagreement about logistics. Their conversations echo through the forest, like town hall meetings, where everyone has strong opinions and no one wants to be the first to leave. The air itself changes, carrying new smells that speak of cold weather and shorter days. There's a crispness to the atmosphere that makes your fur fluff slightly, as if your body is already beginning preparations for challenges it remembers from some ancestral memory you don't consciously possess. Nights become noticeably longer and significantly colder. You wake up some mornings to find frost, decorating the world like nature's attempt at interior design, transforming familiar landscapes into crystalline art installations that are beautiful and slightly threatening at the same time. The combination of all these changes creates an atmosphere of pleasant anxiety, like being at a party that's clearly winding down but where no one wants to be the first to leave. There's beauty in the transformation, excitement in the preparation, and an underlying awareness that winter is coming whether you're ready for it or not. Your mother's obsession with preparation begins to make more sense as you realize that all this frantic activity is essentially nature's version of getting ready for a very long trip to a place where room service isn't available. The nuts she's burying with such care aren't just food storage. They're insurance policies against a future where finding anything edible will require considerably more effort than it does now. You begin to understand that autumn isn't just a season, it's a deadline. Everything around you is racing to complete preparations for winter, and you're starting to realize that you probably should be paying more attention to these preparations, because apparently they're going to matter more than you initially understood. The beautiful, colorful, dramatically dying leaves aren't just nature's art project. They're a countdown timer, marking the approach of a season that will test everything you've learned about survival during your comfortable summer education. The party is ending, the easy times are finishing up, and it's time to find out whether you've learned enough to handle what comes next. Winter's approach transforms your casual interest in nuts into something resembling religious devotion. What started as a pleasant hobby, collecting shiny things that taste good, suddenly becomes a graduate-level course in survival economics that no one bothered to warn you would be graded on a curve where failure means starving. Your mother's frantic autumn behavior finally makes sense when you realize that nuts aren't just snacks. They're currency, insurance policies, and retirement plans, all wrapped up in hard shells that require significant effort to crack. The casual nut gathering of summer transforms into a complex evaluation system that would make a bank loan officer proud. You quickly discover that not all nuts are created equal, and your previous strategy of grab anything round and brown reveals itself to be the approach of someone who clearly hasn't been paying attention to the finer points of quality control. Each nut now requires a thorough inspection process that involves more steps than you previously thought possible. First, there's the visual assessment. Good nuts should look like they're taking care of themselves. Smooth shells without obvious cracks, uniform coloring that suggests internal health, and a general appearance that doesn't scream, "I've been sitting in a puddle for 3 weeks." Nuts with dark spots, strange growths, or shells that look like they've been through a small war are generally poor investment choices. The weight test comes next. You learn to hold each nut and feel for the subtle difference between full of delicious sustenance and hollow disappointment that will mock you when you crack it open in January. Good nuts have a satisfying heft that suggests they're taking their job seriously. Light nuts are usually either empty or occupied by creatures who got there first and are probably not interested in sharing. The shake test is perhaps the most sophisticated part of the evaluation process. You hold the nut near your ear and give it a gentle rattle, listening for the telltale sounds that indicate whether the contents are fresh, dried out, or have been replaced by something that's moving around in there and probably shouldn't be. Your first attempts at this diagnostic process are about as successful as you'd expect. You spend considerable time carefully evaluating nuts that turn out to be decorative rocks, tree droppings, or small fruits that smell good but taste like punishment. You also reject perfectly good nuts based on aesthetic criteria that have nothing to do with their nutritional value, like dismissing acorns because their caps don't sit at aesthetically pleasing angles. The burial process, which looked straightforward when your mother was demonstrating, reveals itself to be an engineering challenge that would frustrate a civil engineer. Your first attempt at creating a cache involves selecting what seems like an ideal location: soft soil, good drainage, convenient access, and then discovering that digging a hole is significantly more complicated than making a hole-shaped depression in the ground. The soil, which appeared cooperative from the surface, turns out to have opinions about your excavation project. It's either too hard, too soft, too rocky, or too full of roots that seem to have been placed specifically to interfere with your digging efforts. You spend considerable time creating what you believe to be a perfect storage cavity, only to discover that it's simultaneously too shallow to provide adequate protection and too deep for convenient access. Your hole digging technique involves more enthusiasm than precision. You attack the earth with the determination of someone who has never considered that soil might fight back. Dirt flies in directions you didn't authorize, creating a debris field that makes your burial site visible from considerable distance to anyone who might be interested in your activities. The nut placement ceremony requires more precision than you initially anticipated. Simply dropping your carefully selected acorn into the hole and covering it with dirt turns out to be the approach of someone who hasn't thought through the logistics of retrieval. The nut needs to be positioned correctly, covered with the right amount of soil, and marked with subtle indicators that will help you remember its location without advertising its presence to competitors. Your first burial attempt results in a storage site that looks like a small explosion occurred in your chosen location. The ground is disturbed in a pattern that clearly indicates recent digging activity. The excess dirt is distributed in ways that suggest someone was either very enthusiastic or very inexperienced, and the whole area has the subtle aesthetic appeal of a small construction accident. 5 minutes after completing this masterpiece of camouflage, you realize you've already forgotten exactly where you buried your precious cargo. The location, which seemed so memorable during the burial process, now looks exactly like every other patch of slightly disturbed ground in the area. You spend the next hour digging exploratory holes in increasingly desperate patterns, creating what eventually resembles a small minefield of abandoned excavations. This experience teaches you the crucial lesson that location memory is a skill that requires more practice than you initially anticipated. Simply remembering near the big tree, or by the rock that looks like something, proves inadequate when you discover that every tree looks big from certain angles, and most rocks look like something if you stare at them long enough. Your mother observes these early efforts with the patient expression of someone watching a student learn important lessons the hard way. She offers gentle corrections to your technique, but clearly believes that some knowledge can only be acquired through personal experience of failure, followed by gradual improvement. As autumn progresses and your range expands, you begin to understand that your neighborhood isn't just a collection of trees and convenient jumping routes. It's a complex social environment where every location has history, every tree has a personality, and invisible property lines crisscross the landscape like political boundaries on a map that no one bothered to show you. The oak tree that serves as the central hub of your territory turns out to have what can only be described as a superiority complex. Its branches are sturdy and well-positioned, its acorn production is reliable, and it clearly knows it. The oak carries itself with the confidence of prime real estate that doesn't need to advertise its value. Other trees defer to it in ways that become apparent once you start paying attention to the subtle social dynamics of your arboreal neighborhood. The maple tree, by contrast, has the personality of someone who's trying too hard to be popular. Its branches are positioned in ways that seem designed for convenience rather than structural integrity, and it produces seeds that are more entertaining than nutritious. Those little helicopter pods that spin as they fall, providing aerial entertainment but not much in the way of winter sustenance. The pine tree at the edge of your territory maintains the attitude of a grumpy neighbor who doesn't want anyone on their lawn. Its branches are dense and prickly. Its needles create an acidic carpet that nothing else wants to grow in, and it drops cones with the enthusiasm of someone throwing things at trespassers. Visiting the pine tree always feels like imposing on someone who's tolerating your presence, but would prefer you find somewhere else to conduct your business. The birch tree, with its distinctive white bark and delicate branches, has the personality of someone who looks elegant, but isn't entirely reliable under pressure. Its branches have a tendency to bend more than you expect them to, creating situations where you find yourself hanging from what turns out to be a very flexible support that's more suggestion than structure. Learning to navigate between these distinct personalities requires developing a mental map that includes not just physical routes but also social protocols. Some trees welcome visitors, others tolerate them, and a few make it clear that your presence is noted but not necessarily appreciated. The invisible property lines that crisscross this territory become apparent through a series of awkward encounters that teach you about boundaries you didn't know existed. You discover these lines primarily by crossing them and then dealing with the consequences, which range from disapproving chittering to more direct forms of feedback from residents who take their property rights seriously. Your first territorial dispute arises when you attempt to cache a particularly promising acorn in what appears to be an ideal location. Soft soil, good drainage, convenient access to multiple escape routes. You're halfway through the burial process when another squirrel appears with the confident bearing of someone who's about to explain property law to someone who clearly hasn't been paying attention. This squirrel is noticeably larger than you, with muscles that suggest a workout routine involving more than casual tree climbing. Their fur has the healthy shine of someone whose diet includes premium nuts, and they move with the fluid confidence of someone who's never had to worry about whether a branch will support their weight. The conversation that follows is conducted entirely in chittering, but the meaning is unmistakable. You are digging in someone else's territory. Your activities are not authorized by the local management, and you need to relocate your burial project to somewhere that doesn't involve trespassing on established claims. You attempt to negotiate, suggesting that there's clearly enough space for everyone, and that your small burial site hardly represents a significant intrusion on anyone's territory. This argument is received with the patient expression of someone explaining basic concepts to someone who's clearly missed several important lessons about how the world works. The discussion escalates when you make the mistake of continuing your digging while talking, apparently under the impression that the conversation is more of a friendly chat about local customs than a formal notice of eviction. The larger squirrel's response to this misunderstanding is swift and educational. What follows is less a fight than a brief, one-sided lesson in the physics of territorial disputes. You find yourself relocated to a different tree with more speed than dignity. Your carefully selected acorn confiscated as evidence of your poor decision-making, and your understanding of property rights significantly expanded through direct experience. The encounter leaves you with a new appreciation for the importance of reconnaissance before beginning any burial project. You develop a more cautious approach to site selection that involves careful observation of the local squirrel traffic patterns, identification of frequently used routes that might indicate territorial claims, and a general policy of asking permission before digging holes in areas that might already have owners. Your education in staying alive takes a dramatic turn when you realize that the world is full of creatures who view you as a mobile lunch rather than a fellow resident of the ecosystem. This revelation transforms your casual approach to daily activities into a constant state of alert awareness that your mother probably should have mentioned earlier, but apparently hoped you'd figure out gradually. Hawks represent your introduction to the concept that death can arrive from directions you weren't expecting. Your first hawk encounter happens while you're engaged in what you believe to be a perfectly safe activity, namely, sitting on a branch, eating a nut while enjoying the morning sunshine, and feeling generally pleased with your life choices. The hawk appears in your peripheral vision like a small, fast-moving cloud that's heading directly toward you with the focused intent of someone who's just spotted exactly what they were looking for. The experience is roughly equivalent to looking up from your lunch and discovering that a small airplane is attempting to land on your table. Your response to this situation is pure instinct filtered through panic. You drop your nut, abandon your comfortable perch, and execute what can only be described as emergency evasive maneuvers that involve more falling than flying. The hawk, meanwhile, adjusts its trajectory with the casual precision of someone who's done this before and isn't particularly surprised by your predictable response pattern. What follows is a brief but educational chase scene that teaches you several important lessons about aerial predators. First, they're faster than you. Second, they can change direction more quickly than you. Third, they have significantly better eyesight than you initially realized. Fourth, your best defense isn't speed or agility, it's reaching dense cover before they reach you. You dive into the thickest part of the oak tree's canopy with the desperation of someone who's just realized that life and death situations don't provide practice rounds. The hawk's pursuit ends abruptly when the branch density reaches the point where their wingspan becomes a liability rather than an advantage. They circle once with what sounds like irritation before departing to find prey that's less inconveniently located. This encounter fundamentally changes your relationship with open spaces. Areas that previously seemed convenient for travel now appear as danger zones, where you're visible to creatures who view the world from above, with the perspective of shoppers scanning supermarket shelves. You develop an appreciation for thick canopy cover and a nervous habit of checking the sky before venturing into any area where you might be silhouetted against the horizon. Your education in ground-based threats comes courtesy of a domestic cat who appears in your territory with the silent confidence of someone who's been genetically engineered for murder and is very good at their job. Cats, you discover, move like liquid nightmares, flowing around obstacles, appearing in locations where they weren't a moment before, and generally behaving like physics doesn't apply to them in the same way it applies to everyone else. Your first cat encounter happens while you're engaged in ground-level foraging, investigating a promising patch of earth that might contain buried treasures from previous seasons. You're focused on your archaeological project when you become aware of being watched by something that's very good at not being noticed until it wants to be. The cat is positioned about 20 feet away, sitting with the patient stillness of someone who's prepared to wait as long as necessary for you to make a mistake. Its posture suggests complete relaxation, but its eyes have the focused intensity of someone conducting very precise measurements and calculations. You freeze, which is probably the worst possible response, but feels like the only available option. The cat continues its motionless observation, creating a standoff that could theoretically continue indefinitely if someone doesn't make a decision about what happens next. The situation resolves when you attempt to back slowly toward the nearest tree, moving with what you hope is casual nonchalance, but probably looks more like someone trying to sneak out of a party without saying goodbye. The cat interprets this movement as the opening move in a game they're very good at, and you're probably going to lose. What follows is a brief but intense educational experience in the difference between running and fleeing in terror. The cat moves with fluid efficiency, covering ground with a flowing gait that suggests they could maintain this pace for considerably longer than you can maintain your desperate sprint toward vertical safety. Your escape succeeds primarily because you're closer to climbable territory than the cat initially calculated. You reach the oak tree with enough lead time to scramble up its trunk to a height where cats become significantly less confident about their footing. The cat sits at the base of the tree for several minutes, looking up at you with what appears to be professional respect for a worthy opponent who managed to reach safety through good positioning rather than superior speed. This encounter teaches you that ground-level activities require constant awareness of potential escape routes, and that cats view squirrels as engaging entertainment that combines hunting practice with light cardiovascular exercise. Advanced nut storage, you discover, is less about digging holes and more about developing a three-dimensional filing system that exists entirely in your memory and needs to remain accurate through several months of winter, when your life might depend on your organizational skills. The location selection process evolves from "this spot looks nice" to a complex evaluation system that considers drainage, accessibility, security, and memorability. Good cache sites need to be easy for you to find but difficult for competitors to detect, protected from weather but accessible during storms, and memorable enough that you can locate them months later when the landscape has changed completely. You develop a preference for locations that have multiple reference points, not just near the big rock, but 3 tail lengths north of the big rock that looks like a sleeping bear, 2 branches up from the exposed root system, in the soft soil beside the cluster of ferns that turns yellow in autumn. This approach to location memory turns every burial into an exercise in creating detailed mental maps that need to remain accurate across seasonal changes. The physical technique of burial becomes more sophisticated as you learn from early mistakes. Holes need to be deep enough to protect their contents from surface scavengers, but not so deep that retrieval becomes an archaeological expedition. The soil needs to be packed firmly enough to prevent settling, but not so firmly that digging becomes difficult when the ground is frozen. You develop a camouflage system that involves carefully replacing disturbed soil, redistributing leaf litter to match surrounding patterns, and sometimes adding misleading indicators that suggest digging activity in locations that don't actually contain anything valuable. This approach creates a network of decoy sites that hopefully confuse competitors while providing backup landmarks for your own navigation. The mental mapping system that develops to track your cache locations would impress professional librarians. Each site exists in your memory as part of a complex 3-dimensional index that includes seasonal landmarks, distance measurements, and multiple cross-references that help you triangulate locations even when individual reference points have changed. You learn to create cache networks rather than individual storage sites, clusters of buried nuts in the same general area that provide multiple options for retrieval and backup supplies in case some locations become inaccessible or compromised. This distributed approach reduces the risk of losing entire food supplies to single catastrophic events, The crushing realization that other squirrels sometimes discover your carefully hidden treasures comes as a significant blow to your confidence in your camouflage techniques. You arrive at what should be a perfectly preserved cache site to find evidence of unauthorized excavation, disturbed soil, empty holes, and the unmistakable signs that someone else has been shopping in your private pantry. This discovery transforms cache management from a simple storage problem into a security challenge that involves counterintelligence measures and backup planning. You begin creating false cache sites, carefully camouflaged holes that contain nothing valuable but might occupy the attention of thieves who discover your general storage area. You also develop a more sophisticated approach to cache distribution that involves storing supplies across a wider territory, using multiple storage strategies, and maintaining several different types of emergency reserves that require different discovery methods to locate. Learning to read the sky becomes a survival skill that transforms casual observation of clouds and wind patterns into a sophisticated early warning system that helps you prepare for conditions that could determine whether your next few days are merely uncomfortable or potentially life-threatening. Your weather education begins with the simple observation that some days feel different before they look different. The air carries information about approaching changes, shifts in pressure, humidity, and temperature that register as subtle sensations rather than obvious visual cues. You learn to pay attention to the way your fur responds to atmospheric changes, the behavior of birds and other creatures, and the subtle shifts in wind patterns that precede major weather events. Cloud reading becomes a specialized skill that involves understanding not just what different cloud formations mean, but how they interact with local geographical features to create specific weather patterns in your territory. The same cloud formation that means light rain in an open field might mean severe storms in a valley, or might pass over entirely depending on wind patterns and seasonal atmospheric conditions. You develop an appreciation for the early warning signs that suggest major weather changes are approaching, the particular quality of light that occurs before storms, the way bird behavior changes when pressure systems shift, and the subtle changes in plant and tree behavior that indicate they're preparing for difficult conditions. The pre-storm preparation routine becomes a finely tuned operation that combines weather prediction with resource management and shelter preparation. When atmospheric conditions suggest that severe weather is approaching, you initiate a systematic preparation process that rivals the complexity of disaster preparedness protocols used by much larger creatures. Food gathering intensifies during the period immediately before predicted storms, with special attention to high-energy options that provide maximum nutrition in compact packages. Fresh nuts get priority collection and immediate consumption, while stored reserves get checked and repositioned if necessary to ensure accessibility during potentially difficult retrieval conditions. Water source identification becomes crucial when rain might make travel dangerous, and normal water sources might become contaminated or inaccessible. You learn to identify locations where clean water will be available during and after storms, including temporary sources created by rain collection in tree hollows and rock formations. Shelter evaluation and preparation involves more than simply identifying places to wait out bad weather. Good storm shelters need to provide protection from wind and rain while maintaining adequate ventilation, offer multiple escape routes in case conditions change, and contain enough space for potentially extended occupancy without becoming psychologically uncomfortable. Your repertoire of emergency shelters expands to include abandoned bird nests that have been weatherproofed and reinforced, hollow trees that provide natural protection from wind and rain, dense brush piles that create insulated microenvironments, and occasionally, human structures that offer protection without presenting significant risks from the structure's intended occupants. The discovery that some human buildings provide excellent emergency shelter comes as a pleasant surprise, though it requires careful evaluation to distinguish between structures that merely provide protection from weather and those that might contain additional hazards in the form of human activity, domestic animals, or architectural features that could trap unwary squirrels. Abandoned sheds, unused portions of larger buildings, and seasonal structures like gazebos or covered porches can provide excellent temporary shelter during severe weather, provided you can access them without creating conflicts with human residents who might not appreciate uninvited guests. The timing of shelter occupation becomes crucial, arriving early enough to secure good locations but not so early that you're trapped in shelter during conditions that are merely unpleasant rather than actually dangerous. Learning to distinguish between weather that requires immediate shelter and weather that can be managed through normal activity, with increased caution, prevents unnecessary confinement while ensuring safety during genuinely hazardous conditions. Your weather prediction accuracy improves through a combination of systematic observation and painful experience, with the consequences of incorrect forecasting. Mistakes in weather prediction range from minor inconveniences, getting caught in unexpected rain while carrying food that becomes soggy and less palatable, to more serious miscalculations that result in inadequate preparation for severe conditions. The development of backup plans for various weather scenarios becomes an essential component of seasonal survival strategy. Different types of storms require different preparation approaches, and the same weather conditions might present different challenges depending on the season, your current food reserves, and the availability of alternative shelter options. You learn to maintain multiple contingency plans that can be implemented quickly when weather conditions change faster than predicted, or when your primary preparation strategies prove inadequate for conditions that turn out to be more severe than anticipated. This approach to weather management transforms what initially seemed like simple shelter-seeking behavior into a sophisticated system of environmental monitoring and resource management that significantly improves your odds of comfortable survival through challenging seasonal conditions. There comes a moment in every squirrel's life when you wake up one morning and realize that your body has finally figured out what it's supposed to be doing. Your reflexes are sharp enough to catch falling objects without thinking about it. Your tail has achieved the perfect balance between fluffiness and aerodynamic efficiency, and your claws grip bark with the confidence of someone who no longer needs to consciously think about not falling out of trees. This is the peak physical performance period of your existence, a brief, glorious window when you feel like you could probably jump to the moon if someone built a series of appropriately spaced branches between here and there. Your tail, which spent your teenage years alternating between helpful navigation aid and traitor working for gravity, finally settles into its role as the most magnificent piece of personal equipment you own. It's achieved the perfect density, fluffy enough to provide serious aerial control, but not so fluffy that it catches on every branch you pass. The color has deepened to a rich, healthy shade that practically glows in sunlight, and it moves with the fluid precision of someone who's finally learned to drive a sports car. You discover that you can now make jumps that would have seemed impossible just a few months ago. The distance between trees that once required careful planning, multiple backup routes, and a brief prayer to whatever deity protects small mammals now looks like a casual hop that barely requires conscious attention. Your first impossible jump happens almost by accident. You're pursuing what appears to be a premium acorn that's been blown by wind into a location that seems technically unreachable. A branch on a neighboring tree that's separated from your current position by a gap that looks like it was designed by someone who wanted to test the absolute limits of squirrel aviation technology. Under normal circumstances, this would require a complex detour involving climbing down one tree, crossing dangerous ground territory, and climbing up another tree while hoping that nothing notices your extended ground-level vulnerability. But something about the quality of light, the perfect stillness of the air, and your current state of peak physical confidence suggests that maybe, just maybe, you could make a direct approach. You position yourself on the optimal launch branch, calculate angles with the precision of someone who's been doing physics problems their entire life without realizing it, and execute a leap that feels like flying with a purpose. For a brief, perfect moment, you're airborne and completely in control, your tail providing exactly the right amount of steering input, your trajectory carrying you across the impossible gap with the grace of someone who makes this look easy. The landing is flawless, all four paws touching down simultaneously on your target branch, which bends slightly under your weight but holds firm. You pause for a moment to appreciate the elegance of your own performance, then retrieve your prize acorn with the casual confidence of someone who just accomplished something that probably shouldn't have been possible. This success leads to a period of increasingly ambitious aerial adventures. You begin seeking out challenging routes that combine distance jumping with precision navigation, threading your way through complex branch networks with the fluid efficiency of someone who's discovered that three-dimensional space is just another playground. Your bird feeder encounter represents the pinnacle of your physical capabilities, combined with your growing expertise in human psychology and mechanical problem-solving. The feeder in question has been specifically designed by humans who apparently consider themselves to be in some kind of engineering competition with local squirrel populations. It's suspended from a metal pole that's been treated with some kind of slippery coating designed to prevent climbing. Positioned at a distance from nearby trees that should make jumping impossible, and equipped with mechanical devices that are supposed to close access ports when anything heavier than a bird attempts to use the facility. You study this contraption for several days, observing its operation from multiple angles and noting the patterns of bird traffic that suggest optimal timing for an approach attempt. The engineering challenge is significant, but you're currently operating at peak problem-solving capacity and feeling confident about your ability to overcome obstacles that were designed by creatures who clearly underestimated squirrel determination and creativity. Your solution involves a combination of physics, timing, and what can only be described as controlled recklessness. You identify a launch point in a nearby tree that provides the optimal angle of approach. Wait for wind conditions that will assist rather than hinder your trajectory, and execute a precision jump that carries you not to the feeder itself, but to the metal pole supporting it. The slippery coating that was designed to prevent climbing turns out to be manageable if you approach it with enough momentum and don't give it time to work against you. You slide down the pole in a controlled descent that ends with you positioned directly above the feeder mechanism, which is now close enough to access despite its supposedly squirrel-proof design. The mechanical components that are supposed to close when you land on them turn out to be calibrated for creatures who approach from below and trigger the sensors in predictable ways. Your aerial approach from above bypasses their detection systems entirely, allowing you to access the premium bird seed that's been tantalizingly out of reach for weeks. Your successful raid is observed by several birds who seem genuinely impressed by your problem-solving approach, and by at least one human who watches from a window with an expression that suggests they're reconsidering their assumptions about the intelligence of local wildlife. The complex social hierarchy that governs your local squirrel community becomes apparent as you achieve adult status and begin interacting with other squirrels as something approaching an equal rather than an amusing youngster who's still learning basic survival skills. The oak tree, which serves as the central hub of local squirrel society, hosts what can only be described as a complex apartment building where social status determines not just which branches you're allowed to call home, but also your access to the best foraging territories, the most desirable mates, and the level of respect you receive during community interactions. The penthouse suite, located in the oak's highest and most structurally sound branches, is occupied by an elderly female who clearly achieved her position through a combination of longevity, strategic thinking, and what appears to be an extensive network of social alliances. She moves through the tree with the confident authority of someone who's earned her position and doesn't need to constantly defend it. Below her, the prime real estate is divided among several middle-aged squirrels who represent what could be called the professional class of the community. They've mastered the balance between aggression and diplomacy that allows them to maintain valuable territory without constantly fighting over it, and they serve as informal mediators during the disputes that inevitably arise in any community where resources are limited and everyone has opinions about fair distribution. Your position in this hierarchy is initially somewhere near the bottom, in territory that's perfectly adequate for survival, but doesn't include any of the premium features that come with higher social status. Your branches are sturdy enough, your access to foraging areas is reasonable, and nobody actively prevents you from participating in community activities, but you're clearly in the entry-level tier of local squirrel society. The seasonal gatherings that occur around abundant food sources provide insight into the social dynamics that normally remain hidden during routine daily activities. When a particularly productive nut tree reaches peak harvest time, or when humans create accidental bounty by spilling large quantities of seeds, the normally scattered squirrel population converges into what feels like neighborhood block parties, where everyone's invited, but not everyone gets equal access to the refreshments. These gatherings operate under complex social protocols that determine the order of access to food resources, acceptable behavior during competitive foraging, and the boundaries of personal space that need to be respected, even during the excitement of abundant availability. Violations of these protocols result in swift social correction that ranges from disapproving chittering to more direct forms of feedback. You learn to read the subtle body language cues that distinguish between different types of social communication. A squirrel sitting upright with their tail held in a particular position is issuing a general greeting that acknowledges your presence without committing to extended interaction. The same posture, with slight variations in tail angle and ear position, might be conveying territorial warning, romantic interest, or a request for assistance with identifying potential threats in the area. The difference between "hello" and "get off my branch before I make you" turns out to involve incredibly subtle variations in posture, tail movement, and the direction of eye contact that require considerable observation to master. Misreading these signals leads to social awkwardness that ranges from mild embarrassment to more serious territorial conflicts that can affect your standing in the community. Advanced squirrel communication includes a sophisticated system of scent marking that provides information about individual identity, territorial claims, reproductive status, and recent health history. Learning to interpret this chemical communication network transforms your understanding of your territory from a simple collection of trees and foraging areas into a complex information environment where every surface carries messages from other community members. Spring arrives like someone suddenly turned up all the volume controls in nature. The birds become significantly louder and more dramatic in their daily conversations. The trees explode into displays of flowers and new growth that seem designed to attract attention from considerable distances, and the air itself becomes charged with an energy that makes everyone slightly more alert and significantly more interested in the activities of their neighbors. Your own response to these seasonal changes surprises you with its intensity. Suddenly, other squirrels become fascinating in ways they weren't during the practical, survival-focused months of winter and early spring. You find yourself paying attention to details of appearance and behavior that previously seemed irrelevant to your daily routine. The elaborate courtship rituals that unfold around you during mating season involve considerably more chasing than you initially expected, along with dramatic tail displays that seem to be part interpretive dance and part athletic competition. Male squirrels develop what can only be described as performance routines that combine acrobatic demonstrations with elaborate showing-off behaviors designed to attract attention and demonstrate fitness. Your first attempts at courtship are about as smooth as you'd expect from someone who's never participated in romantic negotiations more complex than sharing foraging territories. You approach potential mates with enthusiasm but limited understanding of the protocols involved, leading to interactions that are more educational than successful. The chasing component of courtship turns out to involve considerably more running than you anticipated, along with complex three-dimensional pursuit routes that test your aerial navigation skills while simultaneously trying to demonstrate your desirability as a potential partner. The physics of romantic pursuit through tree branches require multitasking abilities that combine athletics with communication, while maintaining enough mental capacity to avoid running into solid objects. Your tail becomes a crucial component of courtship communication, serving as both a signaling device and a performance prop that needs to be maintained at peak fluffiness and moved with precision timing to convey appropriate romantic messages. The difference between attractive tail display and accidentally comic tail behavior turns out to be more subtle than you initially realized. The shocking discovery that other squirrels find your previously private neurotic food hoarding habits to be attractive personality traits completely restructures your understanding of what constitutes desirable social behavior. Your careful nut evaluation techniques, your systematic approach to cash management, and your paranoid backup planning strategies are apparently viewed by potential mates as evidence of reliability and long-term thinking that suggests you'd be a dependable partner for raising offspring. This revelation transforms your relationship with your own personality quirks, from mild embarrassment about your obsessive preparation habits to pride in skills that demonstrate your value as a potential co-parent. The same behaviors that made you feel socially awkward during your younger years now serve as evidence of maturity and competence that others find genuinely appealing. The courtship process also reveals that your preferences in potential mates have become more sophisticated than simple attraction to obvious physical characteristics. You find yourself drawn to squirrels who demonstrate competence in survival skills, show evidence of good judgment in territorial management, and display the kind of calm confidence that suggests they'd be reliable partners during the inevitable challenges that come with adult responsibilities. Your territory eventually expands to include areas where human activity creates an entirely different set of survival challenges and opportunities. Urban environments present problems that wouldn't occur to squirrels living in purely natural settings, but they also offer resources and advantages that can't be found in traditional forest habitats. City living introduces you to the concept of power lines as an alternative transportation network that runs parallel to your traditional tree-based infrastructure. These cables provide direct routes between distant areas, but they come with their own set of navigation challenges that require learning about electrical systems, weather-related safety issues, and the social protocols that govern sharing space with birds who also use these routes. Your first powerline experience teaches you that electrical cables have different load-bearing characteristics than tree branches, respond differently to wind and weather, and sometimes carry currents that create sensations ranging from mildly unpleasant to seriously alarming. Learning to distinguish between safe electrical infrastructure and components that should be avoided requires observing the behavior of more experienced urban wildlife and paying attention to subtle visual cues that indicate potential hazards. Traffic patterns become a crucial component of urban survival strategy. The rivers of fast-moving metal objects that flow through streets, operate according to predictable schedules and behavioral patterns that can be learned and used to plan safe crossing strategies. Understanding rush hour timing, weekend variations, and the relationship between weather conditions and traffic behavior allows you to minimize ground-level exposure during high-risk periods. The humans who populate urban environments display different behaviors than their suburban and rural counterparts. City humans move faster, pay less attention to individual wildlife, but also tend to be more tolerant of squirrel presence in their daily activities. They're less likely to take personal offense at your foraging activities, but they're also less likely to provide intentional food supplements or assistance during difficult weather. Urban food sources are more diverse, but also more unpredictable than traditional natural resources. Restaurant waste, accidentally dropped food, and intentional feeding by squirrel-friendly humans provide opportunities for high-quality nutrition, but these sources require different evaluation techniques to distinguish between safe consumption and items that might be contaminated or nutritionally inappropriate. Suburban environments present their own unique challenges, primarily involving homeowners who seem to view squirrel activity as a personal challenge to their authority over their property. These humans invest considerable time, energy, and financial resources in developing increasingly sophisticated anti-squirrel technologies designed to protect their gardens, bird feeders, and stored goods from what they apparently consider to be organized squirrel raids on their personal resources. The elaborate wars that suburban humans wage against squirrel food storage activities provide ongoing entertainment and intellectual stimulation as you develop countermeasures for their defensive innovations. Each new anti-squirrel device represents a puzzle to be solved, often requiring multiple approaches and considerable creativity to overcome engineering solutions that were designed specifically to thwart squirrel problem-solving abilities. Your suburban territory includes several homeowners who seem to take your presence as a personal challenge to their intelligence and resourcefulness. They install increasingly complex deterrent systems, modify their landscaping to eliminate convenient access routes, and sometimes resort to methods that suggest they're treating squirrel management as a competitive sport where victory is measured by successful exclusion of wildlife from their property. Rural environments offer the advantage of extensive natural resources and significant space for territorial expansion, but they also present predator challenges that are less common in urban and suburban settings. The constant background awareness of things that want to eat you becomes more prominent when you're operating in areas where apex predators maintain active hunting territories and view squirrels as routine components of their diet. Rural predator management requires different strategies than urban survival techniques. The threats are more numerous and more varied, but they also operate according to more predictable natural patterns than the random hazards present in human-dominated environments. Learning to coexist with hawks, owls, foxes, and other predators involves understanding their hunting schedules, territorial boundaries, and the environmental conditions that make them more or less likely to be actively pursuing prey. As your expertise in nut evaluation reaches professional levels, you begin to develop what can only be described as a philosophical approach to acorn selection that goes beyond simple quality control to encompass broader questions about effort, reward, and the optimal allocation of limited time and energy resources. The zen of quality control evolves from basic techniques for detecting obvious flaws to sophisticated diagnostic approaches that can identify subtle indicators of internal condition, future storage potential, and nutritional value per unit of handling effort. Learning to detect wormholes before committing to burial becomes a meditation on attention to detail that transforms routine food preparation into an exercise in mindful observation. You develop the ability to assess nut quality through multiple sensory inputs simultaneously: visual inspection, combined with tactile evaluation, weight assessment, and even subtle acoustic analysis that provides information about internal structure and moisture content. This multisensory approach to quality control allows you to process large quantities of potential food storage efficiently while maintaining standards that ensure your winter reserves will provide reliable nutrition when you need them most. The economics of effort versus reward becomes a constant calculation that influences every foraging decision. Each potential food source needs to be evaluated not just for its intrinsic value, but for the total cost of acquisition, processing, transportation, and storage weighed against the probability that you'll be able to successfully retrieve and consume it when needed. A premium acorn located in dangerous territory might not be worth the risk of acquisition if equivalent nutrition is available through safer alternatives. Conversely, Extraordinary food sources might justify unusual risks or extended effort if they provide disproportionate nutritional returns that significantly improve your overall survival prospects. This cost-benefit analysis extends beyond individual foraging decisions to encompass broader strategic planning about territorial expansion, cache distribution, and seasonal preparation timing. The question, "Is this nut worth a three-tree detour?" becomes representative of larger decision-making frameworks that help you optimize resource allocation across multiple competing priorities. Your approach to seasonal planning evolves into a sophisticated system of risk management that balances current needs against future requirements, while accounting for the uncertainties inherent in weather prediction, territorial changes, and competition from other wildlife. You definitely identify with the ant in the classic grasshopper and ant fable, but your version of diligent preparation involves considerably more complexity than simply working hard during abundant seasons. Your planning system includes contingency strategies for various winter scenarios, backup cache locations that provide redundancy against theft or inaccessibility, and flexible resource allocation approaches that allow you to adjust your consumption and storage patterns based on changing conditions throughout the preparation season. The development of personal standards for cache quality and distribution reflects your growing expertise in long-term survival planning. Not every nut deserves premium storage conditions, but identifying which food sources warrant your best preservation techniques requires understanding the relationship between storage, investment, and retrieval value across different seasonal conditions. You learn to maintain multiple categories of stored resources: premium reserves that receive optimal storage conditions and are reserved for emergency situations, routine supplies that provide basic nutrition during normal winter conditions, and experimental caches that allow you to test new storage techniques or preserve unusual food sources that might expand your dietary options. The philosophical dimensions of your approach to food security extend beyond practical survival concerns to encompass questions about the relationship between preparation and anxiety, the balance between reasonable caution and excessive worry, and the psychological comfort that comes from knowing you've done everything possible to prepare for challenges that might never materialize. Your systematic approach to seasonal preparation provides not just material security, but also the mental peace that comes from knowing you've applied your best knowledge and effort to creating a foundation for survival that should be adequate for any reasonable challenges that winter might present. This confidence allows you to enjoy the present season, while maintaining appropriate concern for future needs. The sophistication of your resource management system reflects the accumulated wisdom of several successful seasonal cycles, combined with learning from mistakes, observations of other successful squirrels, and gradual refinement of techniques through experimental testing of new approaches. Your current philosophy of acorn management represents the integration of practical experience with strategic thinking that transforms basic survival instincts into a comprehensive life management system. Your peak physical and mental performance period represents the culmination of your education in squirrel survival skills, but it also marks the beginning of your transition from student to practitioner, from someone learning how to survive to someone who's mastered the basics and can begin exploring the more sophisticated challenges of adult life in a complex ecosystem where success requires not just survival, but the ability to thrive and contribute to the continuation of your species. You wake up one morning and realize that somewhere during the transition from reckless youth to responsible adult, you've become the squirrel equivalent of middle management. Your territory is well organized, your cache system runs like a small business, and younger squirrels occasionally approach you for advice with the respectful deference, usually reserved for someone who's clearly figured out how things work. This is both gratifying and slightly terrifying, because you're still not entirely convinced that you know what you're doing. You've just gotten better at making it look like you do. Claiming your own territory turns out to be less about dramatic conquest, and more about finding the optimal balance between your territorial ambitions and what you can realistically defend on a daily basis. Your ideal territory would include the 3 best oak trees in the neighborhood, exclusive access to the most productive foraging areas, and convenient routes to all major food sources without having to cross anyone else's established claims. Reality, as usual, requires some adjustment to these preferences. Your actual territory ends up being a carefully negotiated compromise that includes 1 excellent oak tree with prime branch real estate, reasonable access to several good foraging areas, and defensive positions that you can maintain without exhausting yourself in constant territorial disputes with neighbors who have their own opinions about property boundaries. The process of establishing these boundaries involves a series of diplomatic negotiations that combine posturing, strategic positioning, and what can only be described as genteel intimidation. You need to demonstrate that you're capable of defending your claims without appearing so aggressive that every neighbor decides you represent a threat that needs to be eliminated through coordinated action. Your daily routine develops into a sophisticated management system that balances territory maintenance, resource acquisition, and the various social obligations that come with being an established member of the community. The patrol routes you establish serve multiple functions. They demonstrate your continued presence and territorial commitment, provide opportunities for monitoring the condition of your various cache sites, and allow you to stay informed about changes in the neighborhood that might affect your strategic planning. Cache maintenance becomes a specialized skill that requires both systematic organization and creative problem-solving. Your storage network has grown into a complex infrastructure that includes primary reserves, secondary backup supplies, emergency caches, and experimental storage sites where you test new preservation techniques or store unusual food sources that might expand your dietary options. The inspection routine for your various storage sites involves more than simply checking that your buried nuts haven't been disturbed. You evaluate the condition of concealment measures, assess whether environmental changes have affected accessibility, and monitor for signs that competitors might have discovered your general storage areas, even if they haven't successfully located specific cache sites. Strategic napping becomes an art form that balances energy conservation with security requirements. Your napping schedule needs to account for peak activity periods when territorial patrols are most important, optimal foraging times when food sources are most accessible, and social obligations that require your presence during community interactions. The locations you select for routine napping require careful evaluation for safety, comfort, and strategic positioning. Good napping spots provide concealment from predators, comfort for extended rest periods, and quick access to escape routes if conditions change while you're sleeping. Premium napping locations also offer good observation positions that allow you to monitor your territory even while resting. Your reputation as a reliable source of advice about burial techniques and territory management develops gradually through successful demonstration of your own competence, combined with willingness to share knowledge with younger squirrels who are still learning basic survival skills. This consulting role provides social benefits that extend beyond simple altruism. Squirrels who receive helpful advice tend to become allies, who provide mutual support during territorial disputes and cooperative assistance during challenging weather conditions. The advice you provide ranges from basic technical instruction about digging techniques and soil evaluation to more sophisticated strategic guidance about territory selection, cache distribution, and seasonal planning. Your approach to mentoring younger squirrels reflects your own learning experiences. You provide practical guidance while encouraging experiential learning that allows them to develop confidence in their own problem-solving abilities. Your first litter arrives with all the subtlety of a natural disaster that you knew was coming but somehow weren't prepared for despite months of advance warning. The theoretical knowledge that reproduction involves small, helpless creatures who require constant attention turns out to be inadequate preparation for the reality of being responsible for beings who seem even more clueless about basic survival than you were during your most incompetent phases. The nest you so carefully constructed suddenly feels like a cramped efficiency apartment that's been invaded by tiny, constantly hungry roommates who never sleep at the same time and seem to generate needs faster than you can address them. Your partner, who seemed perfectly competent during the courtship period, now appears to be making up parenting strategies in real time with about the same level of confidence you feel. The tiny creatures you've produced are simultaneously adorable and deeply concerning. They're small enough to fit in your palm, completely helpless, and apparently designed by nature to require constant attention while providing no useful feedback about whether your parenting efforts are adequate. They make sounds that could indicate hunger, discomfort, or general dissatisfaction with their living situation. But decoding these communications requires interpretive skills that no one bothered to teach you. Your first attempts at providing parental care involve significantly more panic than you'd prefer to admit. The feeding schedule that seems straightforward in theory becomes a complex logistics challenge that requires coordination with your partner, constant monitoring of infant condition, and frequent adjustments based on needs that change faster than your ability to understand them. The sudden understanding of why your mother always looked slightly unhinged hits you with the force of a revelation. The calm competence she displayed during your own childhood was apparently the result of considerable experience, managing situations that routinely border on barely controlled chaos. The patient guidance she provided was delivered by someone who was simultaneously trying to keep multiple small creatures alive, maintain territorial security, and manage her own resource requirements during a period when her energy reserves were being constantly depleted by demands from dependents who contributed nothing to household productivity. Your respect for your mother's parenting abilities increases exponentially as you discover that raising offspring involves multitasking skills that would challenge an air traffic controller during peak travel season. You need to monitor the condition and behavior of multiple small creatures while maintaining awareness of external threats, managing your own nutritional requirements, and coordinating with your partner on logistics that become more complex as the offspring grow larger and more mobile. Teaching basic survival skills to creatures with the attention span of goldfish proves to be one of the more challenging aspects of parenting. Your carefully planned lessons about tree navigation, nut evaluation, and territorial awareness are received with enthusiasm that lasts approximately 30 seconds before being replaced by interest in whatever random distraction has just entered their field of vision. Your attempts to demonstrate proper branch selection techniques are interrupted by student questions about why leaves are green, where wind comes from, and whether it's possible to eat bark. Your explanations of cache burial procedures are derailed by debates about the optimal depth for holes, the relative merits of different soil types, and detailed discussions about whether worms are food or friends. The safety lectures you consider essential for survival in a world full of predators compete for attention with their fascination with butterfly flight patterns, the acoustic properties of different types of bird songs, and experiments in creative jumping techniques that demonstrate complete disregard for the laws of physics and personal safety. Your parenting style evolves into a combination of practical instruction and damage control that prioritizes keeping everyone alive, while gradually introducing concepts that might eventually develop into functional survival skills. You learn to break complex lessons into smaller components that fit the attention spans you're working with, and to repeat important information frequently enough that some of it might eventually be retained despite the constant distractions. Spring arrives like nature's annual renewal project, transforming your territory from winter's monochrome survival landscape into a vibrant ecosystem that suddenly offers opportunities, challenges, and social obligations that require immediate attention and strategic planning. The renewal hustle begins before you're entirely ready for it, demanding energy reserves you're not sure you've fully replenished from winter's long conservation period. The competition for prime nesting spots intensifies as pairs of squirrels evaluate available real estate with the seriousness of people shopping for homes in a seller's market. Your established territory provides advantages in this competition, but it also attracts attention from younger squirrels who think your prime branch locations might be available for negotiation or possibly hostile takeover. Your spring territory defense requires balancing firm boundaries with diplomatic flexibility that maintains community relationships, while protecting resources you'll need for successful reproduction and offspring development. The social dynamics of spring territorial negotiations involve more complexity than winter's straightforward resource protection, because reproductive success depends not just on individual survival, but on creating stable conditions for raising vulnerable young. Summer represents the closest thing to easy living that your species experiences. A lazy abundance period where food sources are plentiful, weather conditions are generally favorable, and the constant anxiety of resource scarcity temporarily relaxes into something approaching contentment. Your daily routine shifts from survival mode to what could almost be called leisure. If leisure activities included systematic territory, patrol, cache maintenance, and ongoing social obligations to offspring who still require considerable supervision. The abundance of summer creates its own strategic challenges. With food readily available, your foraging activities shift from desperate scavenging to selective procurement of high-quality resources that provide optimal nutrition for current needs while building reserves for future challenges. The temptation to become complacent during periods of easy availability needs to be balanced against the knowledge that seasonal abundance is temporary and winter preparation cannot be postponed indefinitely. Your summer social activities expand beyond survival-focused interactions to include community gatherings that serve social and informational functions. These occasions provide opportunities to maintain relationships with neighbors, exchange information about territory changes and resource availability, and observe the development of younger squirrels who will eventually become competitors, allies, or potential partners. Autumn transforms every squirrel in your territory into what can only be described as doomsday preppers, who approach seasonal preparation with the focused intensity of people preparing for the end of civilization. The great preparation frenzy begins gradually and builds to peak intensity as environmental cues indicate that winter's approach is accelerating beyond the point where procrastination remains a viable option. Your autumn routine becomes a carefully orchestrated campaign that balances multiple competing priorities: intensive food collection, cache preparation, nest winterization, territory security, and the ongoing supervision of offspring who need to learn seasonal preparation skills while contributing to family survival efforts. The coordination required to manage all these activities simultaneously while maintaining the quality standards necessary for winter survival creates organizational challenges that would test a professional project manager. The community atmosphere during autumn preparation combines cooperation with competition in ways that reflect the shared challenges everyone faces, balanced against the reality that resources are finite and individual family survival depends on effective personal preparation. Your relationships with neighbors shift toward mutual assistance in areas where cooperation benefits everyone, while maintaining appropriate boundaries around resources that are too limited to share. Winter settles into your territory like a long-term house guest who wasn't explicitly invited but clearly intends to stay for several months. Survival mode becomes your default operating condition, transforming your daily routine from active territory management to careful resource conservation, combined with strategic utilization of your autumn preparation efforts. The long, quiet months of winter test every aspect of your seasonal preparation. Your burial decisions from autumn are evaluated through the harsh reality of retrieval difficulty, storage quality, and the accuracy of your quantity estimates for extended survival periods. Cache sites that seemed perfectly accessible during autumn may prove challenging to reach during winter weather conditions, and storage techniques that appeared adequate may prove insufficient for preservation through extended cold periods. Your winter routine balances energy conservation with necessary activities that maintain territorial security and family health. The reduced activity levels required for resource conservation need to be balanced against minimum requirements for exercise, social contact, and mental stimulation that prevent the psychological deterioration that can accompany extended periods of limited activity. Your relationship with the local bird population evolves into a complex diplomatic arrangement that combines elements of alliance, competition, and mutual tolerance depending on seasonal conditions and specific resource availability. Birds serve as an early warning system for predator activity, provide useful information about weather changes, and sometimes offer cooperative opportunities that benefit both species. They also compete for many of the same food sources, occupy prime nesting territories, and occasionally display territorial behaviors that suggest they consider squirrels to be unwelcome neighbors. The seasonal variations in bird behavior require ongoing adjustment to your diplomatic approach. During nesting season, birds become significantly more territorial and less tolerant of squirrel activity in their claimed areas. During migration periods, bird behavior becomes unpredictable, as unfamiliar species pass through your territory with different social protocols and resource requirements. Winter bird populations tend to be more cooperative about resource sharing, possibly because the challenges of survival create incentives for species cooperation that outweigh competitive instincts. Your negotiations with chipmunks about ground-level territory rights represent an ongoing diplomatic challenge that requires constant attention to prevent minor disputes from escalating into larger territorial conflicts. Chipmunks occupy ecological niches that overlap significantly with squirrel resource requirements, but their ground-based lifestyle creates potential for cooperation in areas where your arboreal preferences reduce direct competition. The boundary agreements you establish with local chipmunk populations involve complex understandings about seasonal resource sharing, acceptable foraging areas, and protocols for dispute resolution that prevent minor territorial overlaps from developing into sustained conflicts that waste energy for all parties involved. These agreements require periodic renegotiation as environmental conditions change and as population changes alter the balance of territorial pressures. Your occasional diplomatic meetings with raccoons usually begin with cautious mutual evaluation and end with everyone agreeing that avoiding each other represents the optimal strategy for preventing conflicts that nobody particularly wants to have. Raccoons operate on different schedules, have different resource requirements, and possess physical capabilities that make direct confrontation inadvisable for creatures of your size and defensive capabilities. The diplomatic protocols for raccoon interactions emphasize respectful acknowledgement of mutual presence, combined with clear signals about territorial boundaries and resource claims. These negotiations typically result in informal agreements about activity schedules and territory usage that minimize direct competition while maintaining each party's access to resources they consider essential for survival. Your relationship with local humans evolves into what can only be described as a carefully managed partnership, where you provide entertainment and photographic opportunities in exchange for supplemental food resources and tolerance for your territorial activities within their property boundaries. This arrangement requires sophisticated understanding of human psychology and behavior patterns that allows you to maximize benefits while avoiding activities that might trigger defensive responses. Training your local humans to maintain bird feeders at optimal capacity becomes a subtle art that combines behavioral conditioning with strategic timing. Your approach involves demonstrating appreciation for their feeding efforts through visible consumption of provided resources, while also indicating through your behavior that increased feeding frequency would be welcomed and rewarded with continued entertaining squirrel activity. The conditioning process requires patience and consistency. Humans respond well to positive reinforcement in the form of amusing squirrel behaviors performed in locations where they can easily observe your activities. Your feeding schedule needs to align with human observation patterns to maximize the impact of your appreciation displays, and your approach to feeder utilization should demonstrate both gratitude and ongoing need for continued provisioning. The art of looking pathetic enough to earn handouts without appearing threatening requires careful calibration of your presentation. Humans respond favorably to squirrels who appear healthy but slightly needy, confident but not aggressive, and entertaining but not destructive. The optimal presentation involves demonstrating your personality while maintaining appropriate distance that doesn't trigger human anxiety about wildlife interaction safety. Your pathetic appearance repertoire includes strategic positioning that allows humans to observe your condition while maintaining your dignity. Subtle behavioral cues that suggest appreciation without appearing demanding, and timing your appearances to coincide with human mealtimes or outdoor activities when they're most likely to have food available for sharing. Understanding the difference between humans who are photographers and humans who are pest control enthusiasts becomes crucial for managing your public relations strategy within human-occupied territories. Photographers represent opportunities for positive human interaction, combined with ego enhancement that comes from being considered worthy of documentation. Pest control enthusiasts represent potential threats that require careful avoidance and strategic behavior modification to prevent escalation of conflicts. The identification process for different types of humans involves observation of their equipment, behavior patterns, and responses to squirrel activity. Photographers typically carry obvious camera equipment, move slowly and deliberately, and respond to squirrel presence with patient observation behaviors. Pest control enthusiasts tend to carry different types of equipment, display irritation at squirrel activities, and make modification to their property that suggests they're implementing anti-squirrel strategies. Your human management strategy involves cultivating relationships with photographer-type humans, while avoiding activities that might attract attention from pest control-oriented humans. This requires understanding the different trigger behaviors that elicit positive versus negative human responses, and adjusting your territorial activities accordingly without compromising your essential survival requirements. The long-term success of your human management program depends on maintaining the delicate balance between entertaining your human neighbors enough to earn their tolerance and support, while avoiding behaviors that might lead them to classify you as a pest that requires professional management. This balance requires ongoing attention to human reactions and willingness to adjust your territorial activities based on feedback from your human neighbors about acceptable behavior boundaries. You wake up one morning and realize that somewhere between your last territorial dispute and your most recent cache inspection, you've become the squirrel equivalent of a respected elder, the one other squirrels approach for advice about optimal burial depths, and the one who remembers when that oak tree was just a rebellious sapling with attitude problems. This transition into wisdom doesn't arrive with ceremony or announcement. It simply settles into your daily routine like morning fog, gradually becoming apparent through the way you approach decisions that once seemed monumentally important and now feel more like interesting puzzles that may or may not be worth solving. The gradual realization that you don't need to win every territorial dispute comes as something of a revelation, though you can't pinpoint exactly when your default response to boundary challenges shifted from prepare for war to let's discuss this like civilized creatures who have better things to do with our remaining energy. A young squirrel with an impressive tail and an overconfidence problem decides that your prime eastern branch, the one with perfect morning sun exposure and convenient access to 3 different escape routes, would look better in their territorial portfolio. 6 months ago, this would have been grounds for immediate escalation to full combat status, complete with dramatic posturing, aggressive chittering, and possibly some regrettable decisions about acceptable risk levels. Instead, You find yourself evaluating their challenge with the detached interest of someone watching a mildly entertaining performance. Their technique is energetic but unrefined. Their positioning reveals that they haven't thought through the logistics of actually defending this territory if they won it. And their timing suggests they don't understand the seasonal implications of launching territorial campaigns during peak winter preparation season. You respond with a negotiation that offers them access to secondary branch rights during specific time periods in exchange for their assistance with territorial defense during the upcoming winter months. This solution provides them with the status enhancement they're seeking, while maintaining your control over strategic resources and adding their youthful energy to your security arrangements. The young squirrel accepts this compromise with obvious disappointment that they didn't get to participate in the dramatic conflict they'd been mentally preparing for, but also with visible relief that they didn't have to find out whether their confidence was justified by their actual combat capabilities. You both walk away from the encounter having gained something useful, while avoiding the costs that come with conclusive victory or defeat. This approach to territorial management represents a fundamental shift from viewing every boundary challenge as a test of your fundamental worth to treating them as resource allocation problems that can usually be solved through creative distribution of benefits rather than zero-sum competition where someone has to lose everything. Your mentoring relationship with younger squirrels provides ongoing entertainment and occasional frustration as you observe them approaching basic survival challenges with enthusiasm that's inversely proportional to their understanding of the actual complexity involved. They make the same mistakes you made during your own educational period, but somehow manage to do it with less style and considerably more drama than you remember bringing to your own learning experiences. A particularly eager young squirrel approaches you for advice about optimal nut storage strategies, and you spend a pleasant afternoon explaining the finer points of soil analysis, seasonal weather prediction, and backup cache distribution. They listen with the intense focus of someone taking notes for a final exam, ask thoughtful questions about drainage considerations and retrieval accessibility, and depart with obvious confidence that they've just received the definitive guide to food storage mastery. 2 weeks later, you observe them burying what appears to be a perfectly good acorn in a location that will be underwater during the first significant rain, using a digging technique that creates a debris field visible from considerable distance, and applying camouflage methods that essentially advertise the cache location to every potential thief in the neighborhood. Your initial impulse is to intervene with corrective guidance, but you're gradually learning that some educational experiences can only be acquired through personal discovery of the consequences of ignoring good advice. Your role in these situations is less about preventing mistakes and more about being available to provide support and additional guidance when they return, as they inevitably do, seeking help with problems that could have been avoided through closer attention to the information you initially provided. The luxury of being selective about which trees are worth climbing represents one of the more pleasant aspects of accumulated experience and established territorial security. You've developed sophisticated evaluation criteria that help you distinguish between climbing activities that provide meaningful benefits and those that fall into the category of unnecessary physical challenges, undertaken primarily to demonstrate that you're still capable of reaching high places. Your tree selection process now includes factors like structural integrity assessment, reward probability calculation, weather condition suitability, energy expenditure analysis, and availability of alternative approaches that might achieve similar objectives with less physical demand. This systematic approach to climbing decisions allows you to maintain appropriate activity levels while avoiding unnecessary risks that could compromise your continued territorial occupation. This selectivity extends beyond simple risk-reward calculations to include aesthetic considerations and personal satisfaction factors. Some climbing activities are worth pursuing purely for the enjoyment they provide, while others that might offer practical benefits aren't worth the effort if they don't also contribute to your overall quality of life satisfaction. The vast network of buried nuts that represents decades of careful planning has evolved into what can only be described as a comprehensive retirement portfolio that provides both practical security and psychological comfort about your long-term resource situation. Your cache system has grown beyond simple seasonal preparation into a sophisticated infrastructure that includes emergency reserves, experimental storage sites, premium luxury caches, and what could be called archaeological deposits that document your evolution as a strategic resource manager. Your storage network spans multiple territories and includes sites selected according to different strategic criteria, some chosen for maximum security, others for convenient accessibility, and still others located in areas that provide backup options if your primary territory becomes compromised. The distributed nature of your cache system reflects decades of refinement in risk management and contingency planning that would impress professional financial advisors. The occasional discovery of caches you buried and completely forgot about provides the same pleasant surprise as finding money in old coat pockets, along with interesting insights into your previous decision-making processes and storage strategies. These archaeological discoveries of your own past activities sometimes reveal nuts that have aged into interesting flavors, while others document experiments in preservation techniques that proved less successful than you initially hoped. Some of these rediscovered storage sites contain items you don't remember burying, suggesting that either your memory has become more selective than you realized, or you went through a period of very intensive caching activity that exceeded your record-keeping capabilities. These mysterious caches raise interesting questions about the relationship between systematic planning and intuitive preparation behaviors that operate below the level of conscious decision-making. Your approach to cache maintenance has evolved from intensive management of every individual storage site to strategic oversight of your most important reserves, combined with philosophical acceptance that some percentage of stored resources will inevitably be lost to environmental changes, theft, or simply becoming inaccessible due to circumstances beyond your control. This acceptance of acceptable loss rates allows you to focus maintenance efforts on storage sites that provide the greatest strategic value, passing down prime territory to offspring who probably won't appreciate it until they're older. Presents complex challenges in estate planning that combine practical resource transfer with educational objectives designed to help them understand the value of what they're inheriting. Your premium branch locations, established foraging routes, optimized cache site networks, and diplomatic relationships with neighboring squirrels represent decades of territorial development that provides significant advantages for creatures who understand how to utilize these resources effectively. The difficulty lies in transferring not just the physical assets, but also the accumulated knowledge required to maintain and develop them further. Your offspring approach their territorial inheritance with the casual confidence of creatures who've never had to establish territory from scratch, and they sometimes make modifications to established systems based on innovations that seem clever, but ignore decades of experiential optimization. Your role in this transition involves providing guidance, while allowing enough autonomy for them to develop their own territorial management approaches that build on your foundation, rather than simply maintaining it unchanged. This balance between preserving useful established systems and encouraging continued innovation requires patience with modifications that you privately consider to be unnecessary improvements to systems that were already working perfectly well. The changing landscape that serves as the backdrop for your life provides ongoing material for contemplation about the relationship between permanence and change, adaptation and continuity, and the ways that environmental flux requires constant adjustment, while fundamental survival principles remain remarkably consistent across decades of territorial occupation. New buildings appear in locations that were previously forested, replacing familiar landmarks with architectural features that provide different navigation references and create altered wind patterns that affect travel routes and cache site selection. The disappearance of established trees removes resources that had been available for generations, while sometimes creating opportunities for territorial expansion into areas that were previously inaccessible due to established vegetation patterns. The constant flux of human activity creates an ever-changing backdrop of construction projects, landscaping modifications, and infrastructure development that requires ongoing adaptation of territorial boundaries and resource utilization strategies. Your ability to adjust to these changes while maintaining territorial continuity demonstrates the resilience that comes from understanding which environmental features are essential for survival and which ones are simply familiar conveniences that can be replaced with functional alternatives. These observations of environmental change provide perspective on the temporary nature of all territorial arrangements and the importance of maintaining adaptive flexibility while building sustainable resource bases. The landscape of your youth exists now primarily in memory, replaced by configurations that serve similar functions, but require different navigation strategies and resource management approaches. Observing new generations of squirrels making the same mistakes with fresh enthusiasm provides perspective on the cyclical nature of learning experiences and the apparently universal tendency for each generation to believe they've discovered innovative solutions to problems that have been solved repeatedly by their predecessors. Their enthusiasm for approaches that you know from experience are likely to produce mixed results is both amusing and occasionally inspiring. These observations of repetitive learning cycles help you understand your own place in the continuous process of species adaptation and knowledge transmission that operates through individual experience rather than formal educational systems. Your role as an experienced community member involves providing guidance when requested, while allowing natural learning processes to operate without excessive interference from creatures who remember when similar experiments produced predictable consequences. The quiet satisfaction of having survived multiple winters and numerous close calls with predators represents a form of accomplishment that doesn't require external recognition to provide personal fulfillment. Each successful seasonal cycle adds to your accumulated evidence that your survival strategies are fundamentally sound, and each avoided predator encounter confirms that your risk assessment and defensive techniques continue to function effectively despite the physical changes that accompany aging. This satisfaction is enhanced by understanding the statistical improbability of long-term survival in an environment where multiple factors constantly threaten individual continuation. Your continued existence represents successful navigation of countless decisions where different choices could have resulted in immediate termination of your personal story, and this awareness provides deep appreciation for the ordinary days that continue your narrative. The dignified acceptance that some jumps just aren't worth attempting anymore comes as part of a broader understanding that physical capabilities change over time, and wisdom involves adjusting ambitions to match current abilities, rather than continuing to attempt activities that were appropriate for earlier life phases, but now present risk levels that exceed their potential rewards. This acceptance doesn't represent defeat or limitation, so much as strategic reallocation of energy toward activities that provide better returns on investment for your current situation. The jumps you choose to attempt are selected based on necessity, probability of success, availability of alternative approaches, and the strategic value of the objectives they're intended to achieve. Your jump evaluation criteria now include factors like landing surface assessment, escape route availability, weather condition suitability, backup plan feasibility, and energy recovery requirements that help you maintain appropriate activity levels while avoiding unnecessary risks that could compromise your continued territorial occupation. This approach allows you to remain active and engaged while acknowledging that your risk tolerance has evolved toward greater caution. A particularly challenging leap between trees that you used to attempt regularly now gets evaluated through a more comprehensive decision-making process. The distance hasn't changed, but your assessment of acceptable risk levels has evolved to include factors like joint impact tolerance, recovery time requirements, and the availability of alternative routes that achieve similar objectives with lower physical demands. You discover that choosing not to attempt certain jumps doesn't diminish your territorial mobility as much as you initially feared. Alternative routes often provide additional benefits: better concealment from predators, access to resources you might have missed during direct approaches, and opportunities for territorial observation that improve your overall security awareness. Adjusting daily routines for creaky joints and the occasional need for longer naps requires developing schedules that balance necessary activities with increased recovery time that allows your body to maintain the energy levels required for essential territorial functions. Your activity patterns shift toward efficiency and conservation without sacrificing the core functions that maintain your quality of life and territorial security. The recognition that physical maintenance requires more attention than it used to leads to the development of self-care routines that include gentle stretching, strategic positioning during rest periods, and increased attention to environmental factors that affect joint comfort and mobility. These adaptations allow you to continue performing necessary activities while acknowledging that they may require different approaches than they did during your peak physical performance period. Finding the sunniest spots for warming old bones on cool mornings becomes both a practical necessity and a simple pleasure that represents the luxury of having time to appreciate environmental features that you previously took for granted during more urgent phases of life. The warmth of morning sunshine provides both physical comfort and psychological satisfaction that enhances your overall daily experience while serving important thermoregulatory functions. Your knowledge of optimal sun-warming locations throughout your territory reflects decades of environmental observation, combined with increased appreciation for temperature regulation that comes with understanding how weather conditions affect your energy levels and comfort. These warming sessions serve multiple functions. They provide necessary heat therapy for aging joints, offer opportunities for territorial surveillance, and create pleasant interludes in daily routines that might otherwise focus exclusively on necessary survival activities. The integration of comfort-seeking behaviors into your daily schedule represents a shift from survival-focused activity patterns to quality-of-life optimization that acknowledges your successful achievement of basic security requirements. Your ability to spend time on activities that enhance comfort rather than simply ensuring survival demonstrates that your long-term planning and resource management strategies have succeeded in providing the foundation for a life that includes elements beyond immediate necessity. The wisdom years offer the unique satisfaction of understanding that your survival strategies have been validated through extended real-world testing. Your territorial management has achieved sustainable success, and your accumulated experience provides both personal security and the ability to contribute valuable knowledge to community members who are still learning skills you've mastered through decades of practice, refinement, and occasional spectacular failures that provided their own educational value. You wake up one morning and realize that your life has become a comfortable story that's telling itself, with characters and plot lines that feel both entirely familiar and surprisingly fresh. The territory you've spent decades developing runs like a well-organized business. Your relationships with neighbors have settled into predictable patterns of mutual respect, and your role in the community has evolved from participant to something approaching elder statesman. This transition into the final phase of your story doesn't announce itself with dramatic changes or milestone moments. It arrives gradually, like the slow shift from autumn to winter, marked by subtle adjustments in daily routines and a growing appreciation for the simple satisfaction of watching systems you've built continue to function smoothly without requiring constant intervention. Your grandchildren arrive in your life like small tornadoes of energy and enthusiasm, displaying levels of curiosity and recklessness that make their parents seem like models of caution and restraint by comparison. They approach every aspect of existence with the confident assumption that the world was designed specifically for their entertainment and that safety considerations are optional suggestions rather than fundamental survival requirements. Watching them explore the territory you've spent your lifetime developing provides a fascinating perspective on how familiar environments appear to creatures experiencing them for the first time. The oak tree that serves as your established home base becomes, in their perception, an elaborate playground with endless climbing opportunities and mysterious hiding places that require immediate investigation regardless of their structural soundness or accessibility. Your first lesson in grandparent education involves teaching basic nut evaluation techniques to creatures who approach food assessment with the systematic rigor of someone shopping for toys rather than life-sustaining resources. They examine acorns with enthusiasm that focuses primarily on interesting visual patterns, unusual shapes, and surface textures that feel entertaining to handle, while showing limited interest in the subtle indicators of internal quality that determine actual nutritional value. The patient art of demonstrating proper evaluation procedures requires adapting your teaching methods to attention spans that appear to operate on fundamentally different timescales than adult learning capabilities. Your careful explanations about weight distribution, shell integrity, and optimal maturity indicators compete for focus with their fascination with the way acorns roll when dropped, the acoustic properties of different shell types when tapped together, and the aerodynamic potential of nuts as projectiles for games that seem to involve significant amounts of random throwing. You develop a teaching approach that breaks complex concepts into smaller, more manageable components that can be absorbed during brief intervals between their various spontaneous exploration activities. The lesson on proper burial depth, for example, becomes a series of short demonstrations interspersed with opportunities for them to practice digging techniques, while you provide gentle corrections to methods that prioritize excavation, enthusiasm over strategic depth planning. Their approach to cache management reflects the optimistic assumption that winter is a theoretical concept that happens to other squirrels in different territories, and that food storage is primarily an interesting activity that provides opportunities for digging practice rather than a critical survival strategy that requires systematic planning and quality control. They bury nuts with the casual confidence of creatures who expect that spring will arrive before they need to rely on their organizational skills for basic sustenance. Watching the cycle repeat as these young squirrels discover the world with the same mixture of terror and excitement you once felt provides perspective on the continuity of experience that connects your current observations with memories of your own early encounters with survival challenges that seemed impossibly complex at the time, but now appear as routine components of daily life. Their first encounter with a hawk produces reactions that perfectly mirror your own initial introduction to aerial predators, The same startled recognition of vulnerability, the same panic-driven scramble for dense cover, and the same post-encounter period of elevated alertness that gradually settles into practical awareness of sky-based threats. The difference lies in your current ability to observe their learning process from the perspective of someone who has successfully navigated similar challenges and understands that their current terror will eventually evolve into manageable caution. Your role in these educational moments involves providing reassurance and practical guidance while allowing them to experience the emotional impact of discovering that the world contains creatures who view squirrels as food rather than neighbors. The balance between protecting them from unnecessary trauma and ensuring they develop appropriate survival awareness requires careful judgment about when to intervene and when to let natural learning processes operate without interference. The comfortable routine of an established territory that runs itself represents one of the more satisfying aspects of having invested decades in systematic development of resources and relationships that now provide security and efficiency without requiring constant active management. Your territorial boundaries are well established and generally respected by neighbors who understand the costs of challenging claims that are backed by both legal precedent and demonstrated defensive capabilities. The daily maintenance activities that once required significant time and energy have evolved into efficient inspection routines that allow you to monitor the condition of critical infrastructure while leaving time for activities that enhance quality of life rather than simply ensuring basic survival. Your cache network operates with the reliability of systems that have been tested through multiple seasonal cycles and refined through experience with various environmental challenges. Your relationships with neighboring squirrels have settled into patterns of mutual accommodation that minimize conflict while maximizing cooperative benefits. The territorial disputes that once required frequent attention and occasional dramatic resolution now rarely escalate beyond brief diplomatic conversations that address minor boundary adjustments or resource-sharing arrangements during seasonal abundance or scarcity periods. Less frantic preparation for winter reflects both the accumulated wisdom of understanding exactly how much stored food you actually need to survive, challenging seasonal conditions, and the confidence that comes from maintaining cache networks that provide multiple layers of resource security. Your approach to autumn preparation has evolved from the anxiety-driven hoarding of younger years to strategic procurement that focuses on quality over quantity and emphasizes sustainable resource utilization rather than maximum accumulation. The decades of cache supplies that represent your life's work in resource management provide psychological security that allows you to approach seasonal preparation with calm, systematic planning, rather than the desperate urgency that characterizes squirrels who haven't yet learned to distinguish between adequate preparation and excessive stockpiling driven by survival anxiety rather than practical need assessment. Your winter planning now includes strategic decisions about which cached resources to utilize first, which supplies to preserve for emergency situations, and how to balance consumption of older stored materials with recent acquisitions to optimize both nutrition and storage space utilization. This sophisticated approach to resource management reflects the integration of decades of experience with seasonal variations, storage technique, effectiveness, and the long-term planning capabilities that come from successfully managing multiple complete seasonal cycles. The peace of knowing exactly which branches will hold your weight and which ones are just showing off represents a form of environmental intimacy that can only be developed through extensive experience with the structural characteristics of your territory's vegetation. Every tree in your domain has been tested through years of climbing activities that have documented the load-bearing capabilities of different branches under various weather conditions and seasonal changes that affect wood strength and flexibility. This knowledge allows you to move through your territory with confidence and efficiency that eliminates the cautious testing and backup planning that characterizes navigation in unfamiliar areas. Your movement patterns have been optimized through decades of route refinement that identifies the most reliable pathways while avoiding areas that present unnecessary risks or require excessive energy expenditure to traverse safely. Observing the slow changes in your territory provides perspective on the temporal scales that govern ecological development and the ways that environments evolve through processes that operate far beyond the lifespan of individual creatures. New trees growing from seeds you remember being planted or naturally distributed represent the continuation of forest succession that will eventually replace the vegetation that defined your early territorial experience. The gradual maturation of these younger trees creates opportunities for future generations of squirrels, while also changing the character of familiar landscapes in ways that require ongoing adaptation of navigation routes and resource utilization strategies. Your ability to observe these changes with appreciation rather than anxiety reflects the understanding that environmental flux is a normal component of ecosystem function rather than a threat to territorial stability. Old trees falling marks the end of relationships with individual plants that have served as landmarks, resource providers, and structural components of your territorial infrastructure for your entire adult life. The removal of these familiar features creates both practical challenges that require root adjustment and emotional responses that accompany the loss of environmental companions that have been constant presences throughout your personal history. The endless cycle of seasons that provides the rhythm for all squirrel activity becomes, through extended observation, a demonstration of the reliability of natural patterns that continue regardless of individual participation. Your accumulated experience of dozens of seasonal cycles provides confidence that spring will follow winter, that autumn will provide preparation opportunities, and that summer will offer the abundance periods necessary for successful long-term survival planning. This long-term perspective allows you to appreciate the temporary nature of current conditions while maintaining confidence in the continuation of the natural systems that support squirrel survival strategies. Difficult winters become manageable challenges that will eventually be replaced by favorable conditions, while abundant seasons are enjoyed with the understanding that they provide opportunities for preparation rather than permanent improvements to resource availability. The satisfaction of a life well lived in service of the ancient squirrel traditions of preparation and mild paranoia reflects your successful integration into cultural patterns that have enabled species survival through countless generations of environmental challenges. Your personal contribution to this tradition includes the territorial development, cache networks, and accumulated knowledge that will benefit community members and offspring who inherit the resources you've created and the wisdom you've acquired through decades of practical experience. Understanding that your job was never to live forever, just to live well enough to pass something useful on to whoever comes next, provides perspective on the purpose of individual existence within the larger context of species continuity and ecosystem function. Your life's work has been to successfully navigate survival challenges while accumulating resources and knowledge that enhance the survival prospects of future generations who will face similar challenges in environments that may be significantly different from those you've experienced. This understanding transforms the contemplation of mortality from anxiety about personal ending into satisfaction with contribution to ongoing processes that extend far beyond individual lifespans. Your successful survival and territorial development represent meaningful contributions to community resources and species knowledge that will continue to provide benefits long after your direct participation in territorial activities has concluded. A final evaluation of your life's work reveals a legacy of well-managed territory and well-trained offspring. The systems you established, efficient cache networks, cooperative relationships with neighbors, and secure resource routes demonstrate a lifetime of strategic planning and effective execution. These structures ensured multi-seasonal stability and minimized conflict, enhancing both individual and community success. Your offspring have proven their readiness for independence. They possess the critical survival skills and strategic thinking required to adapt and thrive, maintaining and improving upon the territorial foundation you built. Their competence is a clear reflection of your investment in their education and your foresight in preparing them for inevitable environmental changes. As time progresses, your role has naturally shifted from active participant to experienced guide. While physical limitations reduce your direct involvement, your accumulated wisdom now plays a crucial role in mentoring younger members of the community. This transition isn't a withdrawal, but rather an evolution from action to advisory, allowing you to continue contributing meaningfully in a different capacity. Your presence remains a stabilizing force. Decades of experience have equipped you to offer guidance that helps others avoid mistakes and make informed decisions. Your insights into survival and territorial strategy continue to shape the next generation, reinforcing the continuity of squirrel culture and community life. The end of your active story is marked not by drama, but by quiet satisfaction. Rather than a final chapter, it is the completion of a meaningful project, a life lived with purpose, care, and effectiveness. Your legacy lives on in the systems you created and in those you trained to carry them forward. This conclusion underscores a deeper truth. Fulfillment comes not from dramatic exits or unnatural extensions of life, but from meaningful contribution to a larger process. Your legacy isn't defined by longevity, but by impact, ensuring the survival and advancement of the community through well-considered action. Ultimately, your story becomes part of the foundation upon which future generations build. You transition from active presence to remembered guide, from individual effort to integral part of a shared history. Your life, shaped by purpose and skill, becomes a thread in the broader narrative of squirrel existence, a narrative of shared challenges, communal resilience, and enduring wisdom passed on by those who lived well enough to leave something useful behind.